Hey everybody, this is Russ from Metro Game Core. It's a dark and dreary day here in Hawaii. We don't get these very often, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity just to kind of have a laid-back conversation about a news topic. And the one that's most prevalent in my mind right now is the AYN Odin 2 Mini. This one has been trickle teased for about a week and a half at this point, but we finally have enough information, and it's actually going to be going on pre-order starting tomorrow. So I think it's a great time just to talk about everything that we know about it, and make some speculations about things that we can guess about it just based on AYN's track record in the past. Either way, I love the original Odin 2 so much that I thought it's worth talking about the Odin 2 Mini as well, especially because it's going to be going on pre-order sight unseen. Anyway, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, to start, we already have a specs list, and this is probably going to give us about 90% of the information that we need. Right off the bat, there are many things that are not new about this device compared to the original Odin 2. For example, it has the exact same SoC or chipset. It's the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is a powerhouse when it comes to Android-based gaming. As I've demonstrated in a bunch of different Odin 2 videos, this thing is going to be able to play everything that Android is capable of. That includes all the emulators as well as high-end Android games. And because we're using the same SoC, many of the other features are going to follow suit. For example, it has Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth 5.3. It also has DisplayPort video out via USB-C, but they are also including an HDMI port on the device itself. In addition, it'll be running Android 13, much like with the Odin 2, and then it'll also have active cooling to cool down that CPU, and it'll be capable of 65-watt quick charge. And so all of those elements are exactly the same as they were before, but there are a couple things that are different about this one. Let's dive into those. The first is going to be the display. This is going to be 5 inches as opposed to 6, but it is still a 1080p resolution display. The big difference here is that it's a different type of display. Instead of being just a traditional LCD, this is a mini LED panel. Now, as far as I know, this is the first handheld with a mini LED screen, and there are quite a few advantages over LCD panels. For example, they often will have improved brightness and contrast, and we have a couple specs about the screen as well. For example, it's going to have 155% sRGB color gamut, and it's supposed to get as bright as 1100 nits. In addition, it's got a 1,000,000:1 contrast ratio and 384 dimming zones. Now, dimming zones is kind of the big factor when it comes to mini LED displays. I'm not an expert in any of this stuff, but I do remember that the iPad Pro came out with 2500 dimming zones. That's a much larger display, and so maybe that is a factor there. So I'm not really sure how it's going to play out on a 5-inch screen, and so I'm pretty interested to test this out, but as it stands right now, these numbers don't really mean a lot to me yet. I'm interested in seeing what the panel itself will look like. Now, I will say that AYN is one of those companies that's really focused on panels, for better or for worse. They've made a lot of different panel changes over the years with their different devices, and they've also made a lot of software updates to them as well. So I'm hoping they're going to take all that experience that they've accumulated over the past few years, and they used that when they were shopping around for a mini LED display, and so I am hoping this one is going to be pretty good, but you never know until we actually see it. And so that's really going to be the first main difference between the Odin 2 and the Odin 2 Mini, is that it has a smaller display and it's of a different quality. Now, because this device is also mini, it has a smaller battery. The original Odin 2 had a whopping 8,000 milliamp hour battery. It is massive. This one is going to come with 5,000 milliamp hours. That's still above average when it comes to handhelds like this, and so I think we're probably still going to get some pretty good battery life out of it, but who knows? I'm not sure how much battery draw a mini LED panel will have, and because it's smaller, maybe it's going to require more cooling, which will also reduce the battery life. So not really sure yet, but I am expecting to at least get, 4, 5, 6 hours of gameplay, and I think that's plenty for most handhelds. And finally, because the device is mini, it is also going to be smaller and lighter. It's going to be 320 grams versus 420 grams with the original Odin 2. Now, it's weird because I've never really thought that the Odin 2 was too big. I think it's just a larger handheld, but I really like the fact that it has a 6-inch display. So this one is going to be greatly reduced in size. It's between the size of a PS Vita and the Odin 2, but closer to the PS Vita. So I am really interested to see how that's all going to play out from a size perspective. Is it going to be small enough, or maybe a little bit too small? Who knows? I know for a fact that I do like 5-inch screens. I've never found them to be too small. I do find that something that's below that to be a little bit on the small side if you're playing modern games. So I think that 5 inches is about the bare minimum that I would tolerate. And so I do have a little bit of hesitation. I don't like the idea of going from 6 inches down to 5, but it might actually be a better experience because it's smaller and more compact. Now they're going to be offering two different models. There's going to be a high-end model that's going to be both in white and black, and then a low-end model that will be black only. Now the low-end one is going to come with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage, so very similar to the baseline Odin 2. Now above that, the high-end model, the one that has the two different colors, that one is going to have 256 gigs of storage and 12 gigabytes of RAM. So that's more on the pro level of the Odin 2, and that's the model that I own. So I think in terms of performance, you can reference all my other videos that I've made, my previews, my reviews. I made 2 different videos about how I love the device so much. I remember coming back from Christmas holiday and I used it the whole time, so I made a whole video about how I love the thing so much. And then just maybe a month ago, I was like, man, this thing is still awesome. And so I made another video about how I love it so much. And so you can reference any of those videos if you want to see the kind of performance you can expect. When it comes down to it, anything that can be emulated on Android, for the most part, will be able to play on these devices. That includes Generation 6 systems like PS2 and GameCube, and you can upscale it to match the 1080p display. You can actually upscale it beyond that if you wanted to plug it into a 4K TV, for example. One of my other favorite ways of playing games on the Odin 2 is through Nintendo Switch emulation, because there are so many excellent PC ports that are available on Switch, and then you can emulate them on the Odin 2, so you're playing PC games directly on there. It's pretty awesome. Now, unfortunately, the Yuzu emulator, which is the emulation app available on Android, has ceased development. And so because of that, we're not going to see improved performance over time, but all the same, it was still pretty good before they shut down. And so this is one hesitation I have about recommending this device, is that we are going to get to a point of diminishing returns. The PS2 emulator is no longer in development. The Android one for Nintendo Switch is no longer in development. And so as a result, we're just kind of stuck at a stalemate right now for certain systems. And those are probably going to be the best systems to play on this device. Now, thankfully, PS2 emulation, much like Switch emulation, was pretty mature before everything shut down. And so most games are going to play fine. But, you know, it's just one of those things with Nintendo Switch in particular, as new games come out, they may not be compatible. And so you're just going to be out of luck. So now I want to talk a little bit about size. And like I mentioned before, I never found the Odin 2 to be too large. It's basically in between the original Nintendo Switch and the Switch Lite in terms of size. And so if you're okay with playing the Switch or the Switch OLED in handheld mode, this is actually going to be a little bit smaller of an experience. And so I've always really found it to be a very compact and really meaningful experience when it comes to playing games. I love the fact that it's 6 inches because it feels very immersive, but it's still very portable as well. So often when I go on trips, the Odin 2 is always a staple in my bag. I will take it with me because it doesn't require a lot of space in the bag, but it's still very impressive to actually play. Now, another device I have taken with me on trips before is the PlayStation Vita. A lot of that has to do with the battery life because this thing can stay basically in forever standby mode, and it's usually going to be just fine when you start it back up. Now, I've always found that the PS Vita shines the best when just playing PS Vita games. PSP games can play on it as well, but the Vita games are the ones that have really drawn me to it, especially because there are a lot of remastered PS2 games available on the Vita, and so I've loved the idea of having a portable PS2. However, one of the things that does hold me back from really enjoying the Vita is the lack of L2 and R2. It only has L and R up there on the top, and so as a result, it is one of those things where it gets a little bit hard to play certain games. Now, thankfully, the Odin 2 Mini will have L2 and R2. They'll actually be full analog triggers, so it's going to be pretty nice, not only for playing any sort of games that has analog input like the Nintendo GameCube, but then also if you want to do game streaming, that might be pretty awesome as well. I think among all the devices that I have on hand, the one that's probably going to be the best size comparison will actually be the GPD Win 4. This one also has a very PS Vita or PSP style design to it, but it's a lot thicker and heavier. And so I'm expecting that this will not be the same, but at least in terms of size, it's in between a PS Vita and the Odin 2. So it does give me an idea at least of what the Odin 2 Mini might look like. But of course, bear in mind, it is supposed to be a lot thinner. It's supposed to be only 19.5 millimeters across, which is pretty darn thin. In fact, that's almost a dead ringer for the PS Vita thickness, which is only about a half millimeter thinner. Now, one concern I do have about the Odin 2 Mini has to do with the ergonomics. This is going to be a very flat device, and so I do have some worries about whether or not it's going to be comfortable to hold. The Odin 2 I can play all day. It has these ergonomic bumps in the back, especially near the bottom, so I can grab it with my pinky and ring fingers, and it just feels like I have really good leverage, even when playing like a twin-stick shooter game. Now with the Odin 2 Mini, it's going to be very flat. It does have these like little patterns on the back, very similar to the PS Vita, but I'm just not sure if this is going to be very comfortable, especially compared to something like that. So it is a little bit odd that we're going to be getting an upgraded device that also might have a lot of concessions. There's always going to be some sort of sacrifices that happen when you have to go and count for a smaller size, but I really wish it wouldn't be the ergonomics. You know, holding a device is the number one thing you do with a handheld, so it should be a pleasure to hold. So right off the bat, that is one of my major concerns about ergonomics. When it comes to the controls themselves, I have a lot of trust in AYN at this point. So I think the D-pad, the face buttons, the analog sticks, they're all going to be fine. They're probably going to be very similar like how they are in the Odin 2. It also has front-firing speakers. So I think that the audio and then the controls are going to be fine. The video quality, like the display itself, is an unknown quantity at this point, but I do also have trust that they've put some investment into that as well. It's the ergonomics that really kind of make me question whether or not I'm going to enjoy this device. Okay, next let's talk about price. This is actually a little bit more expensive than the Odin 2. So the base model one, the one that's only going to be in black and 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigs of storage, that's going to be $340. So it's about $40 more expensive than the Odin 2. And if you want to bump it up to maybe get a white model or more storage or more RAM, that's also going to be more expensive. It's going to be $399. So that's $30 more than the Pro model of the Odin 2. So right off the bat, we are already seeing an increase in price. Now, I think some of this has to do with costs. I bet that a mini LED panel is a lot more expensive than an LCD one. And then also just the engineering feat of having to make it into a smaller handheld. Typically, when you have a smaller piece of tech, it ends up being more expensive. You think about a laptop versus a desktop and so on. Now, AYN is also saying there will be some coupons available on release day. There are going to be $30 coupons available for the first 200 customers, and then also $15 coupons for the first 300 after that. Now, if you aren't able to get those, I'm not sure how many of these will actually sell. There will be $10 coupons available for the first entire month, and so those will be unlimited. So at the very least, you will get $10 off, but it's still going to be quite a bit more expensive than just the standard Odin. Now, as far as whether or not I think it's going to be worth it at that price point, I'm really hesitant to say yes in any way. After all, this costs more than the Odin 2, which is a known quantity. And that device is amazing, but also still expensive at $299 and above. And so it's hard for me even to say that the Odin 2 is worth it for you, because there are a lot of things that have to fall into place. Number one, you have to be okay with the limitations of Android, but then also you're going to want to have that amount of power on your device. So if you're going to be playing PS2, GameCube, Nintendo Switch, stuff like that, then sure, it makes sense. But if you're just going to be playing retro games, then I would not recommend the Odin 2. And the same thing's going to be for the Odin 2 Mini, if not a little bit more so because it's more expensive. So much like with any other pre-order, I would say to exercise some caution, maybe think about whether or not this is something worth investing in. If you already have an Odin 2, I would say that the Odin 2 Mini is probably not going to be a really good fit unless you're willing to sell the Odin 2 and it's something that you think is too big. I don't know. At this point, I'm really happy with my Odin 2. I never really thought that I would need another handheld for quite some time, and this is a lot sooner than I was expecting. And so again, my last point here is don't fall into the FOMO of just having a shiny new thing. There are so many excellent handhelds out there, and the Odin 2 is still top in my book. And so if you already have the Odin 2, don't worry, that's an amazing handheld. Anyway, that's really about it for this video. I can't really think of any other aspect of the Odin 2 Mini, except for the release date. So I'm not really sure when that's going to be. Obviously, the 20th of May is when pre-orders start, but I'm expecting it to be about a month before it actually starts shipping. And so that's one of those things where, I don't know, when it's costing $340 plus to buy a device, that $10 coupon in that first month isn't really compelling for me. That's just a little dip in the bucket of a device that has a lot of unknowns. And so again, I would recommend exercising a little bit of caution when it comes to the pre-orders, unless you are absolutely sure that that form factor and that size is going to be a great fit for you. Otherwise, I'll have a review unit at some point and I'll let you know if there's any deal breakers with it. And overall, I'm excited about the device, but that price point and the fact that it's coming so soon after the Odin 2, which I love already, I don't know. It's just one of those things where I'm not sure why they did this. It's almost like they're undercutting their own Odin 2 by making another Odin 2. It's almost a direct competition at this point. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Is this a device you are planning on picking up? Are you a huge PS Vita form factor fan? Or maybe you thought that the Odin 2 was a little bit too big? Or are you going to wait like me and just kind of see how this is all going to play out? Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.